Good morning. We're going to start our session now. If we can ask people to please find a seat. Thank you. Good morning. And welcome to today's UCEA Town Hall, Leading in a Time of Challenge. What's an educational leader to do? A great title and a great session we have for you today. I would like to first extend our gratitude to the Wallace Foundation for their generous support of this session and many other critical sessions on school leadership throughout the conference. We hope that you will enjoy those sessions as well. We have 5 excellent panelists this morning who are well aware that school leaders are facing increasingly complex financial and ethical challenges, that the national leadership standards are designed to provide guidance to school leaders during this and future times. And today we'll have the opportunity to hear from practitioners, state and local policy folks, higher education providers, all who are striving to support school leaders in the huge task of supporting both teachers and students. My name is Kelly Latterman. I am a senior policy specialist at the National Conference of State Legislatures. And for the sake of today, I will be State Kelly because I am also joined by Local Kelly. I'm joined today by Katie Anthus, who is the Colorado Commissioner of Education at the Colorado Department of Education. Also by Kelly Pollitt, Local Kelly, who works on those national school boards. She's the Chief Advocacy Officer for the National School Boards Association. We're also joined by Mark Gooden, who is the Program Director of Education Leadership for Teachers College at Columbia University. And Chandra Walker, who's the Director of HR Leadership Development for Gwinnett County Public Schools in Georgia. Please join me in thanking our panelists for joining us this morning. As this is a town hall session, we will have plenty of opportunities for questions from the town hall. To walk you through a bit of what we're going to do today, I'm going to ask each panelist to join us and provide about 6 minutes of opening remarks on a question I have for them. And then we will move on to specific questions from me on what they might have just said, and then we will go on to questions from the audience. So we'll be leaving ample time. Please do make sure if you have questions, you write them down because we'll have the opportunity to hear from you all. First up, we will be hearing from Kelly Pollitt from NSBA, and Kelly's going to provide us an overview of the perspective of contemporary challenges facing educational leaders and the issues that she sees rising to the surface for school boards. With that, I will turn it over to Kelly.
Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome. It's nice to see many of you this second day. Is this your second day of your conference? Well, at any rate, this is a terrific conversation, and I'm really honored to be here to talk with you. In particular, for me, this is an important conversation given that my role at NSBA is new. I've been with the Local School Boards Association for just over a month. And prior to that, spent the better part of almost a decade working to support elementary and middle level principals at the National Association. So this topic is extremely important, and it's heartening to see all of you gathered for this important topic. And I think one of the things that I'd like to talk with you a little bit, and I think is really important as you're all working to support the nation's school leaders, is about local governance. And I think one of the reasons why, and for me it was a very personal, difficult decision to decide to go from working to support in advocacy and professional learning directly with principals. How many of you were principals? All right. We won't ask if you were elementary or secondary. I'm a little biased. But the point is, for me, I saw the conditions that many principals in our nation's schools were facing, and how important it is for them to realize the context that they're working in. And so much of that is shaped by local school boards. So what's interesting is just as a principal has direct influence on student achievement, well, indirect, we know, right? One of the two biggest factors. Interestingly, for districts, where there are high-functioning school boards, there's a greater level of student achievement. And I think that's really important as we talk about what it takes to make a great leader and how you support them to face the current challenges related to student learning needs. Really, what we can talk about in terms of a high-functioning board comes down to 5 areas that may sound very similar to what we think about when we prepare school leaders. It's having a vision, making sure that you're setting a very inclusive process for establishing a vision that sets high standards and expectations for student achievement. It's making sure that you're setting policies, that you're aware of policies and the effect of policies, whether they're inadvertent, whether they're positive, redundant, making sure that you have community leadership and strong infrastructures within your work to get input from stakeholders, both externally and internally. And finally, my favorite, everybody knows that a high-functioning school board usually has a good relationship with the local superintendent. But we all know how political that can get. So if we could advance to the next slide, I think this is an important function. Oh, sorry. Who's driving? Kelly. State Kelly is. This is really important for our leaders to understand if they're going to leverage the kind of atmosphere and possibilities or opportunities that are available for them to create an environment that really revolves around success in student learning and higher levels of outcome across all levels of learning for all students. And one of the things that local school boards do, and why there's this interdependent relationship between our school leaders and local school boards, relies on this big picture. Just as principals need to sort of set the pace and the tone, always looking ahead in their school culture and community about what's next, what do I need to do for my students to prepare them to be college and career ready. Local school boards are responsible for setting the policies that will drive that future development and opportunity that principals can then provide for their teachers, for their students, for parents, and certainly for students. And we know that inherent in all of this work is really the need to focus on equity. So one of the things that school leaders really need to pay attention to, and I'm looking forward to talking with you about this, is how do you help school leaders pay more attention to their context? How do they leverage communities of practice to go beyond their school walls and really interface with local governance? If you think about where there are shortfalls in function and the things that principals are responsible for, they need to be a direct conduit, not just to the superintendent, but to the local governance who can set policies and programs that will better enable them to be successful. And then one of the other big areas of local school board governance that really to me is fascinating and why I think it's an important punctuation on leadership within our education ecosystem is about the ability to ask important questions, ask the right questions using data. And we all know that good leaders need to rely on data to make decisions, to ask those important questions. Questions about where are you investing in students, how are you investing in achievement, supportive structures for teachers, professional development. So I'll end with a couple of bullets that I think are really important. And I want to make sure that everybody understands the commitment that local school boards have is to provide profession-ready and effective teachers and principals in every school and every classroom. And in my short time at NSBA, I can tell you that this is a resounding commitment that they do not waver on. But at the same time, it's really important to note this pressure of accountability, that while they're really focused on empowering teachers and principals and making sure they're prepared effectively, there is this issue about accountability and making sure that principals are held responsible for improvement, at the same time afforded autonomy to do what they do best and support teachers and students in partnership with parents. And I'm going to give a little plug out to a gentleman I just met, Scott McLeod, who just gave me his great book, Different Schools for a Different World. Where are you, Scott? Okay, he was here, but hopefully he'll give me the kudos later. But I encourage you to pick up his book because it's a great discussion about deeper learning for schools and the kinds of things that school leaders need to pay attention to as they're thinking about infrastructure, technology, instruction, and programs. And certainly, and certainly as they're looking at equity across operations and across all functions of government. So local school boards set the tone for how leaders in the district, teachers, principals, superintendent, parents, and really take attention and time to look at what are the needs of students. How do we ensure equity, that all students have the resources and the opportunities that they need to be successful? And I would be remiss if I didn't point out another quick study noted here that NSBA has released earlier this year called Busting the Myth. And this is really about, we have a very heated time and conversation around equity and this notion of choice. And this particular study really talks about how now more than ever, public education is full of choice. And by choice, we mean educational opportunities, whether it's a magnet school, STEM, specialized curricula and programs. These are the kinds of programs and offerings that we believe offer true choice and the kinds of opportunities that all principals and all leaders need to be prepared to offer for children. So with that, I probably went way over. Sorry about that.
You did not. It was just perfect. So we'll turn it over now from local to state and hear from Katie Anthis. I'm going to ask Katie if she'll describe the state-level challenges, specifically what she sees as the most concerning challenges in Colorado. And I'm particularly interested as a Colorado resident myself.
Great. Well, hello, everyone. Let me just take this moment to welcome you to Colorado. As your local host, really appreciate you all being here, and I'm thrilled that you guys are having this conference here. So I hope you're drinking lots of water. For those of you that aren't here, I'm sure they've been reminding you to do so. But we made a pact on this side of the podium that we would stand because we didn't want to get lost behind the podium. So yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about leadership, and leadership from several levels, I think. So I've been the Colorado Commissioner a little over a year, and so I've been able to, I've had different roles in the state education agency over the last several years. But before that, I worked with several of you in UCEA, and I think I see Joe Murphy in the audience. Hi, Joe. It's been a couple years. But I used to work at the Education Commission of the States and worked really solely on leadership. And the importance and the critical nature of school leadership, and worked with Joe in thinking about the ISLIC standards and what does that look like for our states, and just making sure that there's a critical focus on leadership. I think that's important now more than ever, now that I'm at the SEA and I'm charged with implementing a lot of these state-level policies in public education. It's just the importance of sort of vibrant, flexible, problem-solving leadership is so important. And I truly believe that school leadership and district leadership are really the linchpins to school success. They are managing up and down and across all of these myriad of complexities that are coming at them, all of the state level policies that are coming at them. And in all the work I've done in case studies and visiting schools and being in districts, you know, the one thing is, you know, if you have a high functioning system, you have an incredible leader at the helm of that system. So we have to double down on our preparation and support for leaders, and I know you all are doing that work, so I thank you so much. The other thing I just want to talk about a little bit is the tone. So we talk about challenges at the state level. I want to step back a little bit from the detail that's in here, which is none of it is surprising. So I do want to say one of my thoughts in taking on this commissioner role, you know, I didn't expect to be in this role, and I'm in this role, and so I had to do some reflection myself as a leader about what leadership meant, and if I was going to take on this role, what would that truly mean? And I think right now with our, just what's going on in the world, one of my core goals is to model good public leadership. And I think that needs to happen throughout our entire school system. And that actually means not retreating to our sides, not retreating to polarization, but actually truly listening to folks you may disagree with, and truly learning to have some empathy and understanding where they're coming from, and be able to model good quality public dialogue even when we disagree. And so I do just want to say that that's a critical element that I think we need to prepare our leaders for, and I think we as leaders all need to model that. It starts with us first. So all of these things you see here are not going to be a surprise, but they asked me to talk a little bit of challenges at the state level. So these, you know, big shocker here, but money, people, and time, and equitable resources across the state. And I'm speaking mostly for the state of Colorado because that's the state I know most well. But you know, I really think that this is an issue in terms of how we think about the supports of our system. And when we have students that are coming to schools with more challenges, how do we make sure that our school leaders have the resources that they need to rise to those challenges? From the state level, I would say reach and depth. So again, I work at a state agency, so I am constantly thinking this connects to the next bullet, what should our role be as a state agency in supporting, school leaders, specifically principals? We work mostly with our 178 superintendents across the state. But I think because of my last work and knowing how important the principal is, I'm constantly thinking, what should the reach and depth be of the state agency to support principals and support development of principals? So right now, I would say at CDE, we're mostly focused on working with the superintendents on leadership. But I think, as I'm going to mention a little bit, we might start to move beyond that because I believe that principal role is such a linchpin. I think challenges at the state level, this goes back to that idea of, there seems to be a lot of divisiveness in our country, and sometimes that can trickle down to the state level, and I assume trickle to the district level and others. And so there are multiple views of the right path, the right pathway for accountability, the right pathway for student standards, the right pathway for preparation, the right pathway for licensure. There are multiple views of these paths, and as leaders, we are constantly navigating those multiple views. And I, again, go back to that modeling good public leadership of saying, we need to truly listen and understand, and sometimes that means compromise. And it doesn't have to be only point A to point B, but there's multiple ways to get from point A to point B, so I constantly challenge myself to say, what are those multiple paths? And then this balance between instruction, assessment, and accountability. So when I came on board as a new commissioner, I started a teacher cabinet because I wanted, so there are about 21 teachers from across the state of Colorado, and we did an application of who wanted to be on the commissioner's teacher cabinet. We had about 175 applicants. And really, I sit with these teachers for a full day, and we talk about issues. And this last one is the one I hear most. And the reason I'm bringing this up, even though it's coming from teachers, is because I think principals have the key role in setting the tone for instruction, assessment, and accountability. I don't think accountability and support needs to be mutually exclusive. We actually have a full-on teacher leader network, school leader network for our turnaround schools. So for our schools that are scoring lowest on our accountability system, we are wrapping our arms around them and saying, how can we support each other? How can we learn from each other? I think that's another critical piece, is having humbleness to understand that the communities and the challenges that principals are facing are difficult, and we don't have all the answers at the state level. So we need to work together to craft those answers and those support structures that work for those communities. So these are the concerns I hear on a regular basis. I do hear on a regular basis now, and maybe our district, Chandra can speak to this even more eloquently than I can, I'm sure, but that students are coming to school with more challenges. Our mental health challenges, Colorado, sadly, I'm here to report, is one of the top states in suicide rates among teens. It's very difficult to see. This is happening on a weekly basis in Colorado. The revolution of social media, the ability to, I was just with a panel of business leaders this morning, and we talked about time in this day and age, time to get to like 50 million views in any given industry or any given thing, and it's like, 3 days. And you think about that in relation to mental health and students when they're using social media, and how bullying can be amplified to an exponential level. And then how do principals support our teachers to support our students to get through that? So we're really in this revolutionary period, and principals and teachers are struggling with how to deal with this. So we need to think about how we're preparing those adults to deal with those new challenges that students have. Then we do hear this time for various laws and initiatives. Our legislature meets every year, and we get a new slew of 30 new laws, 30 to 50 new laws each year, and those all come down to principals. And so that's always a challenge. Teacher shortages, you all know this. I believe principals are a huge key to solving this. I think we need more pay for teachers, for sure, but actually the #1 reason we hear that teachers leaving is because of the work environment and the support of their principals. So we really need to be training principals to have this really deep support of our teachers, and understanding that. We do know that while teacher supply is short, the teacher retention and the leaky pipeline is one of the most critical aspects of that. So I already talked about the balance of accountability and support, and the stress in supporting the growing needs of our students. So what are we doing? CDE, again, we're trying to figure out where our best leverage points are in supporting school leaders and district leaders. But we do have a unified improvement planning process here at the state of Colorado, where all schools and districts have a unified improvement plan, and we have robust training to support that, and thinking about how improvement planning can identify what's going on in your school and district, and really add supports to that. We are working on refining our strategic plan, and we have a focus on literacy, collaboration, and support. So how do we make sure our leaders are equipped to support teachers in ensuring every student is reading by 3rd grade, knowing that that's a critical gateway place and point. And then equity, collaboration, and support, and this is something new that I think CDE is going to dip into, which is I truly believe that schools can't do this all alone, and part of the stress on schools is that they feel like they have to do it all alone. So how can we think about community-based approaches to thinking about equity and bringing all those resources to the table, whether it be mental health, whether it be housing. You know, the report just came out that most teachers in Colorado can't afford their own housing. So how do we bring all of these different resources to bear, not just in the education system? So that collaboration across sectors and across government lines. I've already talked about our school and district support office, which creates that network of school leaders that are focused on improving our lowest performing schools. And we continue to do that, and we've seen some great success in really diving deep with them, in partnership with them to improve the schools. And we're going to continue that work, and we're actually bringing more schools and districts onto those networks to continue that success trend. And then, as I mentioned, our strategic plan, we have focused a lot on teachers up till now, and really want to say, how do we start to focus more on supporting principals? And whether that means supporting principals through superintendents or other networks that we talk about, or brokering resources, I just think it's a critical necessity for ensuring that our schools are prepared in this day and age. So with that, I think I'm done.
Thank you, Katie. We'll now hear from Chandra Walker from Gwinnett County, Georgia, to hear about the local challenges and what she sees as the most concerning challenges facing school leaders in Gwinnett County.
Thank you, thank you. So what I hope to do is really bring home a little bit, or combine the messages that we just heard from my two colleagues. And that's what's happening in Georgia. So Georgia stands at a critical crossroads in education. And that was a message that was stated by our governor and his team in December 2015. So this told us that something needed to be done if we were going to make sure that the little boys and girls in our state were properly educated and that they were ready, college and career ready. So now, fast forward 2 years, and we know that we are improving in the state of Georgia, but there is a lot of work that needs to be done. And so what we all know is that leadership matters. And so what we decided to do in the state of Georgia is really take a collaborative approach and get lots of buy-in and get people that needed to be at the table to figure out a solution to the challenges we are having in Georgia. And so what we decided to do is really study the work of school leadership in helping us move that work forward. So what is our main challenge in Georgia? And this is our challenge, but I invite you to sort of reflect and think through if this is your challenge in your state as well. And for many of us, I would venture to guess that it is. And our challenge in Georgia is the great variability in the preparation, development, ongoing support, and training of our school leaders. And what we know is that if students are to succeed, they need a strong, effective leader in that building. So you see this map of our state, and we are a very big state with many counties. We actually have 159 counties in the state of Georgia, and only Texas has more counties than we do, and Texas has 254. So we understand that the way that we need to support leaders may influence the way other states support leaders as well. So what you see here on this map, and if you, anyone in the audience from Georgia? All right, thank you. So what we know that we have in Georgia, we have many rural counties, we have suburban, we have urban, we have a variety of poverty, wealth all across our state. So what this poses is a great challenge for leaders and superintendents, actually, who are trying to support students in these counties. We have many training organizations. We have phenomenal universities that work hand in hand with school districts like Gwinnett County Public Schools. But we knew that we all needed to sort of come together to really figure out how we can best support our students. So there was a charge given from our Georgia governor, Nathan Deal. And what he asked was that a study be created to really analyze and investigate this possibility of establishing a statewide leadership academy in hopes of addressing some of our needs and really expanding the knowledge and skills of our aspiring principals, but also principals that are in the seat. Because again, I just described to you, we have a variety across our state of these different types of counties, and then within those school districts. So what he asked was just, what I need you to do, committee, I need you to recommend through your work, and in the end, recommend a scope for such an academy. He also said, I want you to think about possibly, and again, my colleague spoke to this already, but then again, possibly focus on schools and school districts that have unacceptable ratings. So basically what we're speaking about is really these chronically low performing schools. And then he asked if the committee could really propose a criteria for participants and even downright to who would teach in these courses and in our leadership academy. So it's a very big task for this committee. But this committee was not just any committee. So this committee was specially picked, and what we wanted was input across our state. So from the south end of the state all the way up to the north end of the state, what we have is a committee of educators. So we have teachers, we have principals, assistant principals, we have legislators, we have, again, school administrators, we have our university system of Georgia officials, and we have just our community education leaders. So all of these members, so there are about 21 key members of this committee. What we knew was that they already demonstrated strong belief that, again, leadership matters and that our focus should be on the development and training of school leaders. So you see in front of you the tasks. And the tasks of the committee were to, first of all, review research on effective school leadership. And at really the core of this review was Wallace research. And so we know years of research has been conducted by Wallace on effective school leadership. So that leadership piece and research, among others, but also to really look at evidence and sharing of that evidence of leader impact from leadership training organizations. So in this instance, who was brought to the table? Well, we had our Metro Visa organizations brought to the table. We had our GLISI, which is our Georgia Leadership Institute for School Improvement. We had other agencies, and what this committee did was really listen to current programs, current training organizations, and who they were serving in our state. And the key question that was asked before them as they sat on a panel just like we are this morning is, what is your evidence that you are effectively preparing school leaders? So the committee got ideas from them. Then our Governor's Office of Student Achievement actually conducted a study on employment data so we could really look to see what is our need in the state of Georgia for school leaders right now and in future years. So that was a big piece of evidence that let us know that we had to do something and do something now. We also allowed the opportunity for the committee members to really come together and hear from some nationally recognized leaders from training and development programs from Tennessee, from Kentucky, and from Delaware. So these are people that were brought in to really tell us what's working in your state and what are you doing to prepare effective leaders. This provided a great deal of information for the committee moving forward. A very interesting piece of evidence came from the superintendents across the state of Georgia. So they completed a survey that helped determine leadership needs across our state. And so all of that information was taken into account, and what you see in front of you is the proposed, keyword is proposed, Leadership Academy model for our state of Georgia. And I know that it's too small for, the print is too small for you to read, but I'll tell you, this has several arms, and the arms include, as again, we've already heard, a really in-depth program for school turnaround. So really helping those principals who are currently in the seat at turnaround schools that need extra support, and who can we tap into that has that DNA that we know is needed for principals in school turnaround. Also, just a regular arm of principal pipeline development and training, so for aspiring principals and for aspiring assistant principals. Also making sure that we supported district level leaders through seminars and ongoing training sessions. And then again, finally, those specialty programs. So you may have unique needs. We may need to focus on this particular leader for more of the operational pieces, and also maybe for another leader on teaching and learning practices. So this is what we have in the state of Georgia to really address our needs of that variability that is occurring with school leaders in our areas.
Thank you so much, Chandra. Wow, is Gwinnett doing some impressive things around school leadership. We'll now turn it over to hear from Mark Gooden from the Teachers College and ask Mark to describe the role of preparation to support and train leaders to meet these challenges.
Good afternoon. Again, I'm going to put myself on a timer because I don't trust myself. So I'd like to do a couple of things. One is I want to slow down the pace a little bit to speed up your thinking about what we're doing here. We're always asking our leaders to reflect. So I'm going to ask you to just gently enter into a reflection mode. And the next thing beyond that is, of course, we'll be transitioning to questions in a moment. So speaking of questions, I've often said, and I think you might agree with me, that the quality of information that you receive is directly correlated with the caliber of question that you ask. So you've heard my colleagues say, are we asking the right questions? So with that, I start with a thought and a framing question. I won't repeat the thought because you've seen it. I won't read it out to you. It just really connects the major parts of the professional standards. The only thing I've added there is that leaders are being called to be culturally competent and to operate effectively in the current climate in order to contribute to, I should say, each student's academic success and well-being. So what then is the responsibility of leadership preparation programs to ensure that leaders are adequately prepared to meet these challenges and to serve as educational advocates? So before we move on to the next slide, just think about that. I mean, what then is really the responsibility of leadership preparation programs? Okay, so we can move forward. Oh, I'm sorry, I should do that. That's and I think I jumped too far. Can we go back, please? It just doesn't advance on its own? All right. Did I go back? Okay, good. All right, now I'm going to try this again. I was giving you time to reflect. All right. So, okay. So with that, I'd like to ask that we think about this in terms of, first, some questions. After we go through the questions, I'm going to give you an example, and then I'm going to talk to you about some resources related to that example. and then I'll talk to you about some of the literature that this is pulled from. So, first thing, prep programs must engage honestly with the work of equity-centered leadership. So consider these questions. Have faculty in your program critically reflected personally on power and privilege? Have faculty in your program critically reflected personally on power and privilege? And the reason that question is so important, because when you're teaching about equity, and some folks are uncomfortable with that, this is going to come up. If we start talking about how schools have been structured, how neighborhoods have been structured historically, if we talk about the social and cultural context of America, if we talk about all those things that we engage in, this is going to come up. People are going to want to know, students are going to want to know, personally, how do you think about these things? How have you thought about your place in terms of power and privilege as a person who's a professor standing before them? Does your program engage leaders in difficult conversations around oppressive structures and society and schools and their role in dismantling these structures? And that last part is a little big for some folks, like dismantling these structures. People may say, look, I just came in to get my principal's license and to get out and get a job. I wasn't considering this whole dismantling structures and engaging around institutional racism. Well, we like to really disabuse you of that notion and say, yes, we want you to think about that. You have to ask those kinds of questions. Now, are you drawing upon UCA resources and other resources to get into these conversations? I apologize for the acronym, but you can find what this means on UCA's site. The LSDL is Leaders Supporting Diverse Learners modules that were created a couple of years ago, I guess, now. But those are resources that are free to you, and they also have within them some references, some actual things that you can expand your learning. But the purpose of those really is to help you get into these conversations around equity-centered leadership, right? J-cell cases, great resource. I'm going to show you an example of how I used those just a couple of weeks ago in my class that really get into some of those issues around equity that may or may not be in the textbook that you're using. And generally speaking, colleagues at UCEA are really having these in sessions. You can go through the UCEA program and see a number of really fantastic sessions around equity-centered leadership. So are you drawing on these resources or others? I mean, that's the question, to really facilitate those conversations in your classroom so that we can start moving leaders toward action. All right, so complete a curriculum audit of your program, courses, and content. I realize that may be a little redundant. Is there a course that directly interrogates race and culture for equity's sake? Now, this is necessary but not sufficient. Some of you may be familiar with some work that UCA was really engaged in some years ago where we looked at programs at UCA and beyond that had a course that really dealt with equity-centered leadership. There were a number of programs that did not. You need to ask yourself, do we have that in our program? How often are questions about inequities asked in other courses? This is a question around integration. You don't want the course on diversity and equity to be marginalized as that course that we just do at the end of the program, if you know what I mean. All right? How are leaders engaging with communities that have been marginalized? And this is a broader question. You heard it earlier. How are students going out and engaging with the communities? Right? And the broader community is school districts. How are you thinking about how you recruit from school districts? In terms of community broadly, what does it look like when you start to recruit people? What are the racial and cultural makeup of your cohorts? So engage school districts and practicing leaders in your program in substantive ways. So another question, how are practitioners connect with your program? I don't mean just as adjunct professors. I want you to think a little bit beyond that. How are practitioners really engaging in your program? Think about advisory boards. Think about, are you talking with them about what they need in terms of leadership? Or are you leaving it to them to kind of think about that on their own as we think about it at the university, what we want to separately from practitioners? How often are you examining and engaging in work local school districts are doing to address inequities? So how often are you examining and engaging in work that local school districts are doing to address inequities? So I'm going to go on to the next slide to show you just the cases. Actually, the example, which I'll go through quickly, looking at my time, keeping myself honest. I'm running out of time. So here, I see a number of my colleagues here from Teachers College scattered throughout, and they didn't know I was going to do this, but I know Jeff Young is here and Sonia Douglas Horsford is giving a session right now. But this just gives you an example of the program that they're working on in UELP, where some of these things are happening. They're engaging the faculty members around the course content. How do we make changes? For example, the school law course, they met with the professor and talked about particularly social justice aspects of the course. How is it going to connect? And if you look there with the connection to the community, this is the racial makeup of the students in the program: 3 self-identified Latina, 2 white women, 1 Asian woman, 7 black women, and 1 black man. We don't really have gender diversity there, but we have all kinds of other diversity in terms of race and culture. And so they're leading these conversations. So I'm going to go on, rush on ahead. We can come back to this. These are just some of the JCL cases that have been used. And I'm going to stop there. The reference slide is not as important. But look at the topics. I mean, look at the titles of these cases. Does that not feel like equity-centered leadership? This is free and available to you. Well, I guess if you, I don't know what your library situation is at your school, but you can get these cases. But what I'll just say, the students used these and presented these and engaged in really deep ways around these cases. And we did racial autobiographies in the class. Of course, I led that as the professor of the class. But they started to connect their personal experiences with these cases and thought about how they could use this in their schools to talk about equity-centered leadership with their colleagues. And so my time is up. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And all of you, wow, a lot of challenges facing you, and I'd like to dig in a little bit about that. Just yesterday, I was doing some legislative tracking. I have a deadline that was last night at midnight, so all the legislative tracking for 2017 is done. And one thing that struck me is for the first time, I was seeing legislation specifically addressing training and administrating life-saving drugs for opioid overdoses. And this was legislation affecting school leaders. So school leaders being trained in states to provide naloxone and other life-saving drugs. This is a change from the days of administering and requiring solely knowing how to use an EpiPen. So that's one change. I'm seeing legislation about sexual assault and challenges in schools and mandatory reporting. And I'm speaking with principals who are talking to students who say they're afraid to come to school due to challenges with potential immigration status. So there are so many challenges happening in our schools, and school leaders are the first line of defense and support for those students. So I'm curious, we've heard about challenges generally, but from your vantage points, what are the most compelling social justice challenges facing ed leaders now, and how are your organizations addressing those challenges?
Let me just start by owning it. I don't think we're addressing it well. So let me just put that out there. So that's probably why I sat back and was like, are you going to answer? Are you going to answer? But I think it's something I'm becoming more and more aware of. One of the things we're going to start doing at our agency is actually some equity training for our own staff. Because I think what I realized as a leader, and I think I need to read some of those things that Mark put up on the screen, but that I'm not equipped to necessarily lead these conversations. And that if we expect our schools and districts to start leading some of these social justice conversations and some of these difficult conversations around race and community structures, as Mark was saying, then we need to be in a whole learning mode as well. And we need to be open to that. So I have, just in my time as commissioner, first of all, instituted a sort of challenge to our agency around increasing the diversity of our staff so that we start to reflect the makeup of our schools and districts across the state. And so that's going to need to be an active challenge, but then also that we have developed a cross-unit committee, which we're calling an equity committee, to develop some professional development for our own internal staff. So it starts there, I think, and then we need to, once we get some of that learning, then we need to start bringing that out more.
I know I can't see people on the other side, but in our district, we know that we are strongly focusing on cultural competency and cultural responsive leadership. One of the pieces that we're doing from our particular office in leadership development is creating actually a cultural competency simulation. We are almost at the stage where we're ready to launch this with all of our leaders having access to this across our district, and even our university partners. And we have 5 for our school district. One of the pieces that we are doing is really making sure, so in addition to that, also really making sure that with our school division directors and our assistant superintendents, that we're doing everything from helping principals look at the makeup of their staff, when we're talking about staffing allocations, really looking at who is in their building, and do they have teachers and leaders, so even the assistant principal, even the counselors, did we have people in those positions that look like students that walk their halls? So that's an easy thing to do, making sure that your staff is reflective of your community. We're also using our school counselors as leverage points in moving this conversation forward as well. So all of our counselors have been trained on cultural competency leadership as they work with students, knowing that they have great influence over teachers as well. So we're hoping to continue to share these messages in a large forum for doing this, and we have done this now for a couple of years, is at our district-wide summer leadership conference, where we have several sessions for our superintendent, assistant superintendents, all the way down to teacher leaders and our university partners who attend our summer leadership conference. And we have several of our partners here in the audience from Georgia as well. But this message becomes much bigger than that at our summer leadership conference, where we engage all of our leaders in actual activities and understanding their biases and understanding the impact of their perceptions and what their teachers' perceptions have on student learning, because that's a major impact. If a teacher believes that a child, no matter if the child comes to school with a runny nose, or whose mother can't come to the parent-teacher conference because they have 4 jobs, you as a teacher and as a leader have to understand that the way you think about that child and the way they learn will impact what they actually learn.
So I will just add that for NSBA, we absolutely want to own this conversation and contribute to it in a meaningful way. As a national association, the word equity is in our mission. The job of local school boards is to ensure equity and excellence in public education. So one of the things that we've been doing is not only addressing this issue internally, but externally. And internally, we have several councils, the National Black Council, the Council of Urban Boards of Education, the National Hispanic Council, the National American Indian, Alaska Native Council. And those councils are comprised of local school board members who reflect the diversity of their community, which they bring forward their issues and inform other local school board members about how to best address issues facing communities in equitable ways. And I think what we discovered at NSBA, particularly the board, one of the things we knew we had to do was define what we meant when we used the term equity. So the board actually convened through facilitated conversation, which is still ongoing, setting a very specific definition about when you're a local school board member, this is what we mean when we say equity. And it does mean about ensuring opportunities to make sure it's not equal necessarily, but that every child has what they need so that they can reach their greatest learning potential. And I'll just close really fast by saying we're punctuating that work with an equity symposium in February, where we're convening all of our councils, local school board members from across the country, and in fact, you all are invited, in Washington to talk about this issue.
And I'll just add, just really quickly, because I feel like I went a little fast through this slide talking about the racial autobiography being a place to start. And I think the reason that's so powerful, it really helps people reflect and go through, in some ways, deeper thinking about how they have tried to, for whatever reason, push race and culture outside or beyond their leadership, yet they have engaged in practices that have resulted in inequities. And so it's an interesting exercise. I can talk more with you and share all the materials about how we go into it. There's some reading around it ahead of time, because we engage sort of like the intellectual piece and preparing people emotionally what happens. So these are all, for some people, new approaches in terms of teaching the leadership, or forbidden approaches. But I think they're important. I think these are the things that we need to talk about, because we need to humanize education again. Otherwise, you find people really making these callous decisions where they almost, without even unconsciously, and we talk about implicit bias, suspending kids at disproportionate rates, setting them up for like the school to prison pipeline, but not reflecting on their role in that at all. And so we go through that. So when we did it in this class with the Urban Education Leadership Program, a number of these folks are already principals of schools. We have a superintendent of a district in New York City. So they really have access to how the system works. They understand and they see things that a lot of people don't see. So when they start to go in with this critical eye, they begin to ask better questions about themselves and critically examine their own practice. But also start to think about, how can I work with my people? Because this is an issue where a lot of people participate in but don't critically examine and don't do anything about it. So it goes on for years, you know, without being examined or changed.
Thank you. Kelly and Katie specifically, I'm curious if you see ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, as a tool in addressing any of these challenges, and if so, how?
I think it depends on the state, really, for ESSA. So Colorado's in a little bit of an interesting position in that we had a waiver from No Child Left Behind about 5 years ago. We developed our own accountability system 5 years ago. Our accountability system and a lot of our education system elements are all codified in state law. So when ESSA changed, it didn't actually change much for Colorado, because even though the sort of national discussion was, oh, there's so much more flexibility, there's so much, and I'm like, this is all in our state law. So, you know, nothing much changes, but I will say we weren't using the old No Child Left Behind framework. We were one of the first states, because it's actually named the Colorado Growth Model, to be able to not just use proficiency, but how are you getting students to grow? How quickly are you getting students to grow? And that's an important part of our accountability system. If students are coming 3 grade levels behind, you should get sort of, you know, credit, for lack of a better word, for growing your students towards that proficiency rate. And so we had some of those flexibilities that I think a lot of states are incorporating into their accountability system now. We already had that, but doesn't mean that we're not continuing to push on the issues that are talked about in ESSA. And we used the development of our ESSA plan to actually do some further stakeholder engagement, which I still think we have a lot more work to do, but trying to bring in different group, not the same old folks that we always talked about, but this is, you know, thinking about equity too, around community level engagement. And so we tried to do more of that, and we continue to try to do more than that, to talk about how do we use data, how do we use disaggregated data to shine a spotlight on where we need more support, where we need more resources and more training. And so we continue to try to push that envelope in using data to help us identify where more supports are needed.
So poor State Kelly is having a hard time keeping us on track. So I'll just say that Katie hit the nail on the head. We've been talking for a long time, now almost 2 years, that ESSA is a missed opportunity for states that don't have these opportunities to now think more flexibly about differentiated models of accountability, to think about how if you're going to look at growth at the same time that you're looking at annual assessments, how are you building in capacity for teachers and principals? So looking more deliberately and intentional about coherence across different titles of ESSA. And more importantly, while it's not a new provision, stakeholder engagement was required in No Child Left Behind. But I think because of the orientation of the law, it really didn't have the force and effect that it does now. And I would just second that ESSA is an opportunity to really reorient how we do education in the U.S. It's not necessarily that ESSA is the means to the end, it's the importance of using it as a lever for dialogue.
So I have one final question before we turn it over for some audience questions, and that's that, as many of you have stated, these challenges are incredibly real. They aren't theoretical. They impact hundreds of thousands of children every day. So how do we make it a priority for our field that leaders have the support they need to effectively face these challenges with courage, with compassion, with competence?
Yeah, so I think in preparation programs, some of you, I'm certain, are familiar with the research on really how do you develop an effective program and what are the features of some of those programs. And one of the things I hear from students all the time is the power of the cohort. When we bring students in cohorts, they have really a naturally structured relationship that they can continue over the years when they go into their principalship and it gets lonely. But I also think programs have to offer support after the fact. I mean, when I talk to students, and we've interviewed some of our students, it's hard work doing equity-centered leadership because the system and the way people do things really pushes against that. So oftentimes they become worn, they become tired, and there are a number of folks in this room who've written about that. They need support along the way, and we have to think clearly about how we set those structures up in place, and then how do they do this work and maintain relationships. You know, so I think the cohort is the first place, but I think districts have to be intentional about that. I think prep programs have to be thinking about how they support alumni. So there are other ideas, but I'll stop there.
I'll just go back to my opening comment that, I mean, sometimes, so, you know, I mentioned that when I took on this role, it wasn't necessarily an expected role for me, and I had to reflect on my own leadership and what I could contribute. And I just have to be honest that I don't have that all figured out yet, but the thing that I thought about was modeling was the most important thing. And that modeling saying we should have equity as a focus. We should, even though I don't know all the answers to have all these tough conversations, and that we hear from educators that they are scared to have some tough conversations about race and structural inequities because they don't feel equipped to do so. At least talking about it, and at least as I work with my partners in the Department of Higher Education, how do we talk about that and say, okay, let's figure out how we put these things into practice and start by modeling that with the sphere of control you have. So as I mentioned, the most closest sphere of control I have is within my own agency. So how do we focus there first and then start pushing that out? I think we can get so overwhelmed in our roles that we're like, oh my gosh, we have to boil the ocean. We have to figure this all out. But I think we have to figure out ways to transform each moment and learn along the way and have that sort of learning mindset as we go.
Thank you so much. I saw a question over here.
Thank you all for the advocacy roles that you're playing, both individually and within your organizations. When we really seriously look at what's happening in education, we get some really serious problems. And many of those are rooted in policy. And you mentioned in Colorado you have anywhere from 30 to 50 statutes every year. When you look at every state, and you look at all the issues that are taking place, the reality is what's happening is there's isolated voices. We see the school boards, we see the superintendents, we see the teachers' organizations, principals, all speaking in isolation rather than coordinating and working together with one strong voice. And I guess my question, if there's ever a need for us as a profession to have a strong voice as now. I guess my question to you is, what are you doing in your organizations, both at the state and the national level, to try to work together to create that advocacy that we need?
Well, I'm happy to take this question because this is actually one of the #1 reasons why I moved from supporting principals directly to working at a national association where I could help address these very issues that you're highlighting, which is the dirty little secret is out there. We are, because of issues, very polarized, not only divided across the nation, but within education in various communities. And I can tell you that some of that is driven because of policy, actually, and because of funding and resources. We're living in a time of scarce resources that, quite frankly, we're all pitted against one another. And I think recognizing that we can't, because there's something bigger going on than any one of us right now, we have to put that aside and come together as a profession and as a community. I know at our association, we work hand in glove as much as we can with our partners, the unions, NAESP, NASSP, collaborate, as well as with the school psychologists and with other stakeholders in the community. And one of the things that we're trying to focus on is greater public affairs. So we have new campaigns. We have Stand Up for Public Education, for example, where you can join a campaign and receive information on and learn more information about how you can advocate and really address investment and value to public education and what's going on in our community. So we're trying to encourage more of that collaboration, and those campaigns run across all of the various stakeholder groups in education. And you know, to Katie's point, trying to emulate good leadership at the national level, we not only collaborate across national organizations, but we're trying to encourage stakeholders themselves to do that. So we're offering, for example, services. I'll go to a state where I'll help convene a coalition of state and local teachers, principals, psychologists, others who can come together around a shared vision and speak with one voice.
If I can just mention something quickly, Colorado has actually had a pretty good spirit of collaboration, and we're working across all political spectrums to form an education leadership council that we have just started, where we have all of these different folks and opinions and legislators on this force to say, what would our unified vision of education be, and how could we think about that? Because I will challenge you all, and this has been my greatest challenge. I work for a publicly elected school state board, and so I have very diverse opinions on the state board, and I have had to challenge myself every single day to truly listen to diverse opinions and not just disrespect them or discount them, because when you start to unpack that, there's actually some common ground, but you have to do the hard work to unpack it and respect where folks are coming from, you know, even if they're talking about things that you vehemently disagree with. So I would just say to challenge ourselves as leaders to do that.
Thank you. I see a final question.
Well, it's actually not a question, it's an interesting follow-up. I was standing up before that question to say that well, let me tell you who I am, and that gives you some context. My name is Lynn Gangone. I'm president and CEO of AACTE. And, you know, as I'm listening to your conversation on equity and thinking of all the work that AACTE is doing in that space as well, and our partnership with UCEA in the Wallace Foundation work, I'm thinking about how we start with those folks who ultimately move into these school leadership roles. And so just an offer to all of you publicly that we're very interested in continuing and strengthening the collaboration that we would have on this issue, particularly with regard to equity, which is one of our core values and a very strong part of the work that we do at AACTE. So to any of you who are seeking to expand that place in Washington, I agree with you. One of the reasons I joined AACTE was to have that national voice and to make sure that we were out front and center at, I think, a very challenging time in education, in higher education, and we need to have strong collaborative voices in the policy space in DC. So just that reminder that we're there working on those who begin their careers as teachers who then move on to work in the school leadership space, and looking at that continuum I think is really important. So thanks for letting me share that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any final comments that haven't yet been shared, but you feel the need to share out with our audience?
Well, I'll just say at the preparation program level, if you will, I think we as universities have to start thinking differently about how we reward faculty members who are interested in engaging with the community, particularly around partnerships with school districts. Having done that work, I know it takes a lot of time, but man, it is so valuable. It was such a huge learning lesson for me. But you know, when you go back to the university, unfortunately, there's just no value for that. It's just in terms, and I'm talking about promotion and tenure. People are interested in that, I know. But that, to me, that work really is so very important in making the connections and listening to practicing leaders saying this is what we need in our districts. And my concern is if we spend too much time or spend much more time ignoring them, we did have districts when I was in Austin starting to say, look, we need to create do these grow your own programs, or start training our own leaders, or make new partners. So we have to be really mindful of how we reward that, so to speak, in the university, because I think it's very, very important.
One final thing that I would like to share from the school district perspective is just a reminder to all of you at the university level that school districts absolutely need the partnerships of universities. We can't do it alone. We can't develop and support school principals by ourselves. And the person or the school district that says that they can, they are lying. We in Gwinnett and across our state, we value our university partnerships. But the thing that I will just leave you with this note of is understanding that the partnership has to be mutually beneficial. It can't be one way. It can't be just the university saying or asking, give us your folks, give us your talent, help us find people because we need to increase enrollment or what have you. It can't be that. It's not that for us, so I want to make sure that that's clear. But then on the other hand, the districts have to be willing to listen to the universities and invite you into our home and invite that true collaboration. In our school district, we do have ongoing conversations with our university partners. We consider them to be family. We engage in PLCs together and have for a number of years, but it has to be mutually beneficial. And the school district and the universities that can do that, you will find that they are able to really develop truly effective principles that ultimately can impact student achievement. And of course, that's why we're sitting in this room.
Well, my parting thought is don't forget about your local school boards. So as much as again, as much as we're talking about partnerships and collaborating with districts to inform, the human capital management systems, addressing issues of social justice, don't do that and forsake the local governance structure that is so critical to making sure that the work can actually happen. And, there's a challenge. Local school boards are elected officials, and they turn over. So it's a constant battle to make sure that you have a well-informed local school board at your disposal. But the challenge, unfortunately, should be accepted. And just as much as you're facing issues with districts, you may or may not find the same challenges with local school boards. And just remember that, again, it comes down to those strong partnerships, strong, open, collaborative relationships, and that includes your local school board members.
Well, thank you so much. We so appreciate you all joining us today for this timely and relevant conversation about school leaders. And I would like to take this moment to also, again, thank the Wallace Foundation for their generous support of this town hall. I encourage you to continue in this dialogue, continue in these conversations as you move throughout the conference the rest of the week. Thank you.
Nicely done, y'all. Yeah.